Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Stamford, and I'm bringing the meeting today for the Electoral Area Services Committee for the SCRD. It's 9:30. I'd like to call a meeting to order and acknowledge that we are here on the Sunshine Coast within the territories of the Sechelt Nation and the Squamish Nations, and we're honored to be here. To start the meeting, I'd like to look at the agenda. We've got an agenda before us. Is there any changes, additions? I'm not seeing any hands. Would somebody like to move the agenda as presented? I've got carrier, seconder. Let's have a vote. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. And then we don't have any organized presentations and delegations. I also would like to have a motion to pass all reports, receives all reports as presented. We've got a mover, seconder. Going to have a call for hands on that. All those in favor? That passes unanimously. And we also have some people in the gallery, and I just like to let them know that for the official community plan, which is the first item on the agenda, I'll give you an opportunity to speak very briefly, total of 3 minutes total, after the staff presentation. Thank you. So without further ado, let's move on to reports, and we've got 4.1. The official community plan, renewal project, scope and timeline update. And we've got the staff members from planning. We've got Planner Jackson and GM Hall. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides a report back on directors' dialogue in December and January about the preferred scope and approach for renewing SCRD's land use policy framework. The report is focused on scope and key directions, supporting scope analysis, and a summary overview of engagement. The approach described in the report responds to community needs, legislative requirements, strategic priorities, and corporate capacity. The project will update and align policies and regulations to better support the growth and changes happening in our communities, both now and in the future. And Manager Jackson has a short presentation and will speak to some specifics. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a second to load the presentation. All right, apologies, that is not doing it as it's supposed to. I think we'll just have to go with the more manual route. Apologies there. It's not doing the slideshow. All right. So this project has 4 key directions that have been identified to inform the scope of the project. The first is one integrated OCP that is user-friendly and has one companion zoning bylaw. This is designed to work together, and it has been identified to be the best path forward to achieve several project goals and also align with recommendations from the 2023 Development Approvals Process Review. This structure will help to facilitate delivery of a clear, effective, and comprehensive land use framework, coordination of efficient key infrastructure and services, ability to prioritize organizational business decisions, directing housing needs to areas most suitable for growth, the ability to enhance clarity regarding electoral area, local needs, and uniqueness, while also considering larger regional contexts, and the ability to have a united voice when advocating to senior levels of government. The second is focused on 2 pillars of housing and environment and climate. Right here, it's not having my slide show up. There we go. It didn't work. I'll try it one more time. Yeah, it doesn't work. Sorry about that. Number 2 was a focus on 2 pillars of housing and environment and climate. These pillars ensure prioritization and focus on these identified community needs. The housing pillar will consider complete communities with growth accommodated through a variety of housing options and densities in areas that are or easily can be serviced, particularly in relation to fire flows. Conversely, this will also mean limiting new growth in locations that are not aligned with SCRD infrastructure, services, and natural assets. And the environment and climate pillar will ensure a minimum legislative requirements are met. And beyond this, the environment and climate pillar will seek to align with board-directed policies considered and contained within the Climate and Community Action Plan, and consider this integrated approach between community building and natural assets. Environmental stewardship will further consider appropriate protection and restoration frameworks for riparian areas and sensitive ecosystems. The third is that this project will seek alignment with all necessary provincial legislation. This includes addressing DAPR-identified legislative alignment issues and SCRD's land use planning framework, and ensuring that compliance with the legislation changes for housing is met. Finally, the fourth is that this project will consider the regional growth baseline study to inform the OCP. And in doing so, it will help ensure that we understand where growth should and should not occur. So in order to achieve those key directives, there's also some supporting scope and analysis that I'd like to talk about today. So the first is natural assets inventory. This work will support the pillars of housing and environment and climate. And in doing so, the inclusion of this natural assets inventory will identify areas and or assets that are appropriate for environmental stewardship and or in need of climate adaptation considerations. The second is supporting infrastructure analysis. So the OCP renewal will undertake numerous high-level infrastructure analysis to put growth where it makes the most sense. And what's in scope in regards to this is an integration of recently completed fire flow capacity analysis, which is critical to support safe development, and also 2025 inputs from the Fire Flow Action Plan, Water Strategy, and Water Efficiency Plan will be considered. Things that are not in the project scope will need to consider and will need to be considered in future work are additional detailed infrastructure analysis that are looking at capital planning and cost recovery bylaw work to help ensure that the OCP can be properly implemented. The third is development permit area modernization. The OCP renewal project will consider how to efficiently and effectively modernize and re-implement the use of development permit areas to achieve OCP and DAPR objectives and meet legislative requirements. Things that are not included in this scope and may need to be considered in future work are the additional detail for ground truthing to form enhanced development permit areas and create new ones. Finally, implementation plan. The SRT's OCP will include an implementation plan, and this is a first for SCRD, I will note, but it's commonly used in most OCPs in BC, and it will provide policy direction and the prioritization of key work to support successful policy implementation. And things that are included in this would be things such as the cost charge bylaw work and neighborhood plans. For engagement, building public understanding and trust will be key. So this project is designed and will be geographically dispersed and is built to move at the speed of building public understanding and trust. And it will also allow local knowledge to add value to the project. Engagement in the community will both be informed and based on technical realities and legal requirements, while consulting where community input is key in delivering a project that listens to the heartbeat of the community. There is a plan to meet people and groups where they are at and through a blend of in-person and virtual opportunities to share information and invite feedback about the proposed policies and land use framework. In terms of roles, area directors will be supported to be project champions within the community and for this project, and about how the OCP will tackle the big community challenges that we have before us. And APCs will serve as local context advisors and further be supported by 3 to 4 interactive workshops at key milestones. In terms of next steps, a practical, clear, and detailed engagement strategy will be presented to a future committee considering APC feedback that was received in Q4 of 2024. So there's 2 timelines contained in the report. I'm going to talk about them in a backwards order here. So the first one's the not recommended one. These 2 options, they both are supported by a data-driven approach. and they're informing on practical solutions that are grounded in technical analysis and engaging on topics that help the public share the type of community we want to see. So this timeline option number 2, as presented in the staff report, is an alternate project timeline, which is not the recommended one, as I mentioned. And while it has 4 rounds of engagement, there is less time for each engagement round, leaving little room to maneuver and adapt to project outcomes based on the feedback that we're hearing from the community. Finally, the recommended option is project timeline number 1. So this option is designed to have 3 rounds of engagement, but they're a bit longer and more intentional, and they have an ability to go a little bit deeper into the community conversation. It is envisioned that this option will do more to build trust and public understanding through engagement while ensuring there is time to consider reasonable adjustments based on what we're hearing. Both project timelines will deliver the basic building blocks of the future policy and regulatory land use planning framework pre-election. Both project timelines accommodate a project pause during election 2026 season from September through November and would return for a final round of public engagement to address refinements in 2027 with adoption by the end of the year. And with that, I will turn it over to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, staff. It is a prerogative of the chair to allow for public comment, and I've already spoken to some members of the gallery, and I'm going to allow 3 minutes of staff or public comment or questions. The questions should be directed towards the board, and then we will take them up if we want to move forward with them. So if, I think you've got one person representing you, if somebody'd like to come up and make that, those questions or comments about the OCP. Thank you. We have a point of information.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the timeline chart that we saw appears in the agenda, which is on our website, and so the visuals that we had here were not quite as clear as they appear within the agenda. So if anybody's interested in finding the timeline, is there.
Thank you, Director Bax.
Just hold that. Good morning, and thanks for taking my questions. I'm speaking on behalf of the Community Development Forum in Half Moon Bay, and I have 2 questions for the SCRD on the timeline for the OCP update process. And I just want to start with a few sentences of context. The forum was set up by Half Moon Bay residents in 2022 to engage on issues related to land use in our community in alignment with our OCP. Since 2022, we've been hearing about and waiting for an update to our 2014 OCP, seeing that many elements are out of date given climate impacts, the housing crisis, development patterns, and the need to better protect our sensitive ecosystems. We consider the updating of our OCPs to be one of the most important responsibilities of our elected directors and the SCRD, together with and contributing to ensuring our water supply. Knowing that the intent to update the OCPs was already on the table in 2022, many of us are disappointed with the 5-month pause for internal discussions and with the subsequent proposed 1-year delay in completing the project. To further complicate things, this proposed delay means that while this board will consult, shape, and vote on elements of a draft OCP and related zoning bylaw, this will be interrupted by elections in October 2026 and then handed to a new board to complete and vote on in 2027. So the first question to the chair, and it might be rhetorical, does the delay have to be 1 year, or can the key components of the project be finalized by the current board before it dissolves in September 2026? And the second question, if the answer is no, given the risks related to handing over to a new board mid-project, what mitigation can the SCRD put in place to ensure that this doesn't end up in further delays, more cost to taxpayers, or unnecessary opportunities to politicize elements of the project? Thank you.
Thanks very much. So we'll take those questions as part of our discussion, and I have recorded them. And I think that's something that's also in our our consideration too. So let's just put a pin on those, and we'll make sure we get around to them in our discussion. Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to take the public comments that are in person in the gallery. I'm not going to take anything online. It was just a one opportunity for people that showed up here. So I've got hands up on the board. I didn't see who came first, but I'm going to start with Donna. Director McMahon.
Thank you. As I have never been through an OCP process before, not least because Area E hasn't been done since 2008, I'm still trying to get my head around exactly what this is going to look like. Is there a model that we could look at? I've been looking at the Cowichan Valley OCP, but what do I look like? What do I look at that will give me a vision of where we're going to? Because the Area E OCP, as it stands right now, starts with a lot of bump about the history of the community and our high ideals, and then it goes into this painful description of every zone in the Area E and what you can do in it. And is that the direction we're going in? The Cowichan Valley one seems much more high level and talking about policies.
So staff, do you have ideas? Are we going to be looking at examples of where we'd like to see this go?
Thank you for the question. Certainly, there are examples out there. Cowichan Valley Regional District is one. Those are things that we can provide if desired. The one caution I would have there is that this is within the legislative context a bit of a choose your own adventure. And what I mean by that is that we have a project design, but trying to look at it in other communities is not necessarily going to reflect what you're going to want to see in your own. And so I just want to add that caution that, what we actually put in the sections, you want to look at those other OCPs more like coat hangers, where you're going to decide what you're going to, put in your closet. They're the organizer sort of sections, but how we actually populate that and what we put on those hangers, that's up to us. Certainly one of the things that we want to do with this project is ensure that a lot of that sort of local area knowledge that exists in the existing OCPs carries forward into new OCPs. When we talk about neighborhood planning as being a future item, that's really getting down to a more detailed level of looking at localized areas. It might be as small as a hub, so it might be smaller than an electoral area in itself. And it would be looking at how we service an area, put the right type of housing there, have any sort of form and character guidelines if there's commercial areas or higher density housing that we might want to see restrictions on how it's built so that it reflects the community's desires. So those are sort of some of the things that we would do at a later point. But at this point, we would be not wanting to lose that sort of thread of local area planning knowledge that we have in existing OCPs. But when it comes to things like zoning, that's where we want to really harmonize and modernize and really make sure that we take an integrated approach. We have right now a lot of zones that are used possibly only in one electoral area or in a couple, but they're very similar to ones that are used elsewhere. And it becomes very unclear for builders, staff, and the community as a whole as to what those expectations are when you move across an electoral area boundary, which are concepts that have been around for a long time, but not necessarily representative of each sort of community pocket within. So it's really taking a more comprehensive look at how we use zoning to regulate the land use across the regional district.
Are you good? Are you going to wait? Oh, GM Hall's going to add to that. Great.
Thank you. Just briefly, Chair. There are many ways to capture local knowledge. There's a tension between a usable, clear, concise bylaw and capturing everything. And so staff, together with directors, will be considering that tension through this project to ensure that we come up with the most usable project and find a way to capture important information. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Neighborhood plans seem to me that they should reflect what the community wants. And then when we know the community plans, we can then start working on the bylaws and the definitions and stuff like that. Is that factored into the plan, that kind of an approach?
Go ahead, Steph.
Thank you for the question. Chair, yes, it is, in two ways. One, that there will be chapters dealing with local planning matters in the OCP. And secondly, we expect that those building blocks will be completed before the late 2026 project break. Thank you.
Good.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I put my hand down because I got more questions, but I'll take my turn.
Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. And, thank you, staff, for this report and for taking the time to really drill down a little bit. And I'm fine with the scope. I think we've reduced it a little bit to the essentials, so housing and environmental stewardship or environment, which I think are the two main ones that we need to tackle. If we want to, if other things come later, we can certainly add them, I guess. But I just a reaction to the comment from the CDF earlier. So the timeline, and I'm assuming it's because we've added now more engagement to make sure that it is like that we do it right by the residents. And so yes, there are risks involved with that. Understanding that there's an election, oh my God, next year already, crazy. So question to the board is like, how are we feeling about this risk? Do we want to prioritize doing this deep engagement with the community? Or do we want to prioritize getting it done earlier? Appreciating that the staff has done a lot of work with this timeline and has given us some good options, but there's that risk there. So just question to the board how other directors are feeling about that risk.
To Director Gabias's question, do I have comments from the board? We'll start with Director Lee and then go to Director McMahon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm quite passionate about an OCP reflecting what my community wants. So the answer to my question is, I think we need to understand what the community wants and see if we can accommodate it in the plan and still reach our goals. So I think that's going to take quite a bit of engagement. And I think that's a lot to do with the success of an OCP being accepted by our communities, and them supporting and working towards our objectives is to do that. So if it's going to take a little longer, I wish it didn't. Maybe we can find ways to do the most important things right away and do the big ones later. But yes, I'm all for the engagement.
Director McMahon, anything to add?
Yeah, I appreciate that we want to get this process underway. I think the initial timeline was unrealistic, to put it mildly, and I would rather have a realistic timeline, even if it maybe isn't convenient in terms of elections, than have a project that drags on and keeps getting deferred and delayed. Yeah, 4 out of 5 directors were acclaimed in the last election. There's not a huge lineup of people wanting to be regional district directors. And if we are doing the OCP right, and that it's rolling out with correct community engagement, I don't see it becoming a big political football. So maybe it's a way to keep us on track. And if people hate the OCP so much that they're going to vote us all out of office, then we're obviously doing something wrong.
Director Bax, do you have anything to add?
Well, I do believe that the engagement of the public is paramount in this, and that although we are put into place to reflect the needs of our constituents, this is an opportunity for them to engage in the process, which is kind of rare these days. And I know that my community is very deeply involved and wants to, they're chomping at the bit to have their input, to have their say. And if staff can guide my community into what it is that we're trying to shape, educating them as to how, and I'm very fortunate in that I've got a lot of engaged citizens that did create the original OCP. And I want to engage as many of the stakeholders that I have in my community. And so as Director Lee said, it's really not up to us. It's up to our communities to tell us what it is that they want. And it's up to us to try to filter it down to create a document that can work for both staff and the public.
Thank you. I'll just add in, and we can always come back to the conversation, but I just want to add in that as a political scenario, if we do this quick and dirty, we also set ourselves up for a political situation at election time. So whether we take our time and we are halfway through or 2/3 of the way through the process, at time of election and take a pause, that is an opportunity for voters to make their thoughts known as to the direction we're going. Conversely, if they don't like what we do and we finish the process, they will also make their thoughts known. So that's sort of my feeling about where we're sitting with the OCP. And right now, I'm willing to take the risk that slowing it down and having more local opportunities to really understand what the OCPs can do and where they can go is the more important aspect. So that's my take on that. So if we'd like to go back to the question list, Donna, do you have a different question?
I do indeed. I have lots of questions, and just for my own efficiency, I'm going to start putting some of them together. I thought I heard Manager Jackson say that the scope would not include any new DPAs, but that's not actually what the report says. So I wanted to get some clarity on that, because right now, one of the DPAs that we're missing, in my opinion, is wetlands. We have no protection for wetlands that I'm aware of. And then my second question was that the Cowichan Valley OCP has a growth containment boundary. And I thought that was a very interesting concept, and would we be looking at that? Thank you.
Staff, would you like to respond?
Yes, thank you for the question. So in terms of the development permit areas, what's proposed is a modernizing of the existing development permit areas. So that means making sure that they're working for us and actually meeting the policy intent that they were set out to do in the first place and aren't quite achieving now. Granted, some things have changed, especially in terms of legislation around the Riparian Areas Protection Act. In terms of new development permit areas, what is proposed is to do the policy work to set us up for what type of development permit areas we might want to see in the future. What's not in scope is the actual detailed ground truthing of those future development permit areas. So when we decide that we want to do a development permit area, there'd have to be some considerations made at that time. If it's something that's very minor, there might be an ability to do it quickly and efficiently and loop it into the project. If it's something that required more detailed ground truthing on data that we don't have, currently, then that work might need to be done to actually fully establish the development permit area. So then it might become an implementation item. So I think that's why there's a bit of confusion there, is it depends on exactly what we're talking about. So we're sort of leaving that with a little bit of maneuverability in there, depending on what we're hearing from the community and directors as to what's wanted, and then making sure that we actually have the resources and the existing tools in terms of the detailed studies to inform that development permit area. But the policy to inform what type of regulations and framework and tools we want to use, that's definitely within scope. The second question was around urban containment boundaries, or I guess in our case it would be more rural containment boundaries. But when we talk about looking at a really data-driven approach to this project, it means trying to, from the get-go, understand the land, and that means understanding our services as well. So everything from environmentally sensitive areas and natural assets that are ideal to protect and areas that we might not want to promote growth in, to really making the best of our infrastructure and services that we have on the ground and seeking to find efficiencies and identify where the constraints are that will tell a story about where we ought to be growing and where we ought to not grow. And then how we define that in policy can look different ways. It can be around land use designations and zoning themselves, or it can become more formalized in an actual containment boundary. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned about the one line of where it says, and setting greenhouse gas GHG reduction targets. I'm all for doing that for our own infrastructure, our own buildings, our own cars. But to do it community-wide, I think is the job of the province. And I think you've got to actually have a baseline before you start setting a target, and this can get extremely expensive. I'm not at all sure that that should be one of our objectives in the OCP. It's a different issue. We could say, yeah, we need it done, hope the province does it, but that's about where I'd like to see it stop. Interested in your comments.
Staff, would you like to respond to that?
Thank you, Chair. So the Local Government Act prescribes that OCPs contain a greenhouse gas emission reduction target. SCRD does have a community baseline established through an inventory that we update regularly. Thank you.
So did you would like a follow-up? That is part of the requirements. And yeah.
I think I heard that we actually have an inventory of our residents and we can know how much they're doing already. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
My hand's up. I'm just going to skip through to Director Gabius, and then I'll come back to me.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we all have a lot of questions about the technical, like what's going to be in it, we have recommendations by staff here, like there's a part that's about the scope, about the timeline, about budget, about getting an extension. So I feel like we should kind of focus. I mean, I think we have a lot of questions that we can ask staff at a later date. I think this is like, we need to get going on this and try not to pick at it too much. I'm wondering about the recommendation 5, which is the requesting the extension to the deadline for the SHMU. And what kind of impacts? I know we've already asked for an extension on that, and then that's a further extension. So are there any negative impacts we should be aware of? How is this going to affect our community?
So looking at the request for an extension, I have an additional question to add to that. Is there other communities also asking for that kind of extension?
Thank you for the question. Yes, there are. So we've seen extensions that are longer than what we have currently on the docket of June 2026 being given. I think we've seen them up to 2028. So yes, there are other examples out there where the province has granted longer extensions. We have been in constant conversation with them about this, and we found staff with the housing branch at the province quite collaborative in working with staff. So we're hoping that we can have that conversation with them as well as the letter that's proposed to be sent. Thank you.
Do you see any risks to this strategy as per Director Gavious' question?
Thanks. Yes. So in an event where the province did not grant an extension in alignment with the OCP and zoning bylaw timeline, we would be in a position where we'd have to fast track aspects of the small scale multi-unit housing initiatives, which in our case primarily means secondary suites or auxiliary dwelling units in all residentially zoned properties, unless the province has agreed that you've identified a clear risk or hazard to public health is the guideline that we applied under. So if that was the case, we'd have to advance that work prior to the adoption of the OCP. I'd add that right now we're sitting at about 74% compliance in terms of having secondary suites and auxiliary dwelling units permitted on residential properties. In our case, it's mostly where we have sewerage districts that were built to handle the capacity of the housing that are there. And those are the ones that we primarily have to take a look at to make sure that it's safe to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll take the opportunity, because my hand's up. What I've heard you say that there is opportunity, potential requirement that we can pass parts of the OCP as per question from the gallery, if we are so required. I'm not sure if there's any benefits to that. But that's more of a comment. The second part is the one piece that I am unclear on is we've stated that the neighborhood plans are coming later. And yet a lot of this work relies on local input and local considerations. And I'm not sure how to move this through the regional or community level without having more input to a neighborhood plan. That would be critical for me to be able to move this process forward. So that is the one section that I am not, at this point, willing to put off to a later time. And I'm wondering if there is a way of providing at least a structure and an intent within the current process to show what neighborhood plans are going to look like and how they move through.
Thank you. Chair, the answer to your question is yes. Yes, because certainly for illustrative purposes, examples can be provided to show the possibilities. And it is contemplated that there will be chapters dealing with local planning matters within the scope of this project. I would also add there are many existing policy building blocks in current OCPs that can be used toward future neighborhood plans, either as those chapters or as something more or different. And it's a starting point that can be tested as part of engagement. Thank you.
So as a follow-up, ensuring that we do get that local look within this current process that we've got before us, that consideration of examples so that we can then, this is how we're going to sell it to our communities, is how could this look? So they get a visual sense of what to expect. So we do have more hands up, but I'd like at some point someone to consider moving the recommendations. So we're going to start moving in that direction. Director McMahon.
Sure. I'm still, rampaging about the scenery here. not quite ready to move anything yet. Top of page 11, we wanted monthly or bi-monthly check-ins with the board on the OCP. And I wanted to know how staff envisions doing this. Would it be a standing report to the Electoral Area Services Committee, or how would we do this?
Staff?
Thank you. Well, staff aim to serve, Chair. The strategies that we've contemplated are a standing report on this committee's agenda and an opportunity for support in a kind of workshop format, looking at what's coming in the month ahead and addressing specific electoral area questions to ensure that directors feel supported with the work that you will be doing as our project champions. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Lee?
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question, it was around the ADUs and the suites. And specific to my area has not had that update opportunity, whereas all the other areas have got that in there already. I presume that's the 74%. And yet my area is extremely keen on getting that done for workforce housing and the lack of housing. I'm hoping that perhaps we can get some sort of a mini update on that inside of the whole program so that we can get that going right away. Is that a possibility, is my question.
Staff?
Thank you for the question. Chair, if staff are directed to look at the feasibility of that and come back with information about implications for other projects, we'd be happy to. Thank you.
So Director Lee, if you have a motion you'd like to propose, if you want to work on that, that motion, we can consider it after we look at the bigger recommendations. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The reason I mentioned it is that it is part of recommendation number 3. So that's, I was not sure I'm ready to vote on that one. Maybe we want to take these motions one at a time and discuss them.
If that's the pleasure of the board to look at these separately, these recommendations separately, we could do it that way. But if you are going to propose changes, I would like to have that prepared ahead of time. And it sounds like you're looking for a specific recommendation for Area A.
Yeah, what Ian said.
So we'll leave it right now, but if you can come up
We'll
with
leave it to the end then and then
Okay.
add it if we need to.
Okay, sounds
thank
good.
you.
Director Bax.
Thank you. I want to draw attention to the, on page 9, timeline for next steps. In the second point, schedule APC workshops in March. Now, I'm fortunate enough to have a community group that's actually written themselves into the OCP, and I would request that a representative from my OCPC be included in any APC workshops for the OCP. And I know there are other community groups that are invested in this work, and I would hope that a single representative be invited to these APC workshops so that they may disseminate the information that they receive to the rest of their group in order to keep my community involved and included and informed. I don't know how that's supposed to look, but it's my desire that this happens.
I'm going to take a suggestion here that you are the champion of this process in your local community, and that you're always welcome to bring whoever you'd like to attend your APC meetings. So rather than leaving it up to staff to do that kind of thing, it might be an opportunity for you to bring your different groups together when APCs meet.
you,
That's
Chair.
just my suggestion.
That's good. Thank you. That's a way forward for me.
Director McMahon. Oh, yeah, Director Gabius hasn't spoken, so I'll let Director Gabius. No? Director McMahon.
Okay, I note on page 8 that First Nations will be invited to engage in this. And we don't know what that means. On the other hand, the province is kind of mandating that we do this engagement. And so if they want us to do this engagement, then presumably they should in some way support it or resource it. Because they're also wanting us to get our OCPs done. So I don't know, does staff have any further thoughts on this topic?
And I will just give you a minute there. I'm also going to add that being in the process of an OCP that is involving First Nations, that the timelines are often quite a bit longer. And so I am also interested in detailing out what exactly our expectations are on that single line item, which to me is going to be quite a big part of how we move forward.
Thank you, Chair. This is an area that is there's appears to be high variability in the planning field. It's also an area of emerging change. The province does not provide, for example, capacity funding related specifically to OCPs, but there are programs like the Community to Community Forum program provided through UBCM that may be a support to a project like this. As noted in the report, until we initiate dialogue, we don't know what the expectations of the First Nations whose land we are on will be, and we will report back as we learn more. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. And just looking at the recommendation number 4. So again, I'm okay with the scope. Timeline, if we agree to the timeline that's proposed, it will have some financial impacts. We're delaying this another year, so this is going to come back to budget, to next budget. So I'm not sure how, kind of want to have a high level idea of what kind of financial implications we're talking about here before I'm, ready to commit to it. So I'm not sure if staff has any rough idea of what we're talking about here.
Staff, do we have any sense of the budget implications of the recommendation?
Thank you, Chair. I hesitate to offer a detailed estimate, but this project is supported by time-bound incremental staff resources for both planning and GIS. And so I would expect that those would need to be sustained for at least a couple of quarters. And additionally, there would be some engagement work. But the bulk of the consultant work should be completed in 2026. Everything that will go into the bylaw that will be provided in 2027 will be done in 2026. Thank you.
Follow up?
Thank you, Chair. And if I understand correctly, so there will not be an extension of the consultant contract.
Thank you, Chair. It's very easy to forecast a quarter or 2 or 3 forwards, knowing that we're talking about decisions that will come after multiple rounds of engagement. I hesitate to, if I may, to answer that question at this time. But the known continuation would be for those incremental in-house resources with some engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Director McMahon.
Yes, on page 4, it notes that we, quote, must consider the housing needs report that we got. I was recently at the Electoral Area Directors Conference, And indeed, the province's mandated protocol for housing reports resulted in wildly inaccurate reports for the rural areas of this province. Nobody thought the housing report was faintly realistic. So I suppose this is our chance to get our own back, because MOT or MOTI must consider our OCPs, and they don't seem to pay much attention to it. So I think maybe this is our opportunity to ignore the housing reports that were inaccurate and unrealistic for rural areas. Just saying. Because we're not going to put whatever it was, 450 new housing units in Area E, not realistically, not without a big change to the infrastructure we have available. Are we, so I'll just ask, are we seriously considering these housing projections?
Staff?
Meeting legislative requirements means they must be considered. How we approach that question from a policy point of view and at a regional scale is something that we'll have to work on together with the community through this project. Thank you.
Yes.
So, and I should have asked this, I mean, we have to consider the coast as a whole. We're not, Area E is not an island. So how will we be aligning our process with the municipalities that are already underway with their OCP processes?
Is that clear? Yep.
Thank you for the question. And I'm pleased and I'm proud to say that there's very good cooperation and collaboration at the administrative level on current long-range planning work, up to and including Manager Jackson spending the day with District of Sechelt planners last week at their session. And beyond this one project, which we've also taken a look at how key milestones interface with OCP work in other in municipalities, we're also looking at deliverables from our other projects like Fire Flow Action Plan, Coastal Flooding Study, to ensure that they work well with OCP timelines in municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the answer I was hoping to hear. Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair. Just to respond to the concern about the housing needs report and the inaccuracies, I think it's a document that was produced and staff will consider it, but it doesn't, I don't see that we have to meet the targets. Like it's a target. I think like staff can contextualize that information and utilize it for the benefit of the document. So I'm not too worried about that. And also for the collaboration piece or the cross-pollination piece, it does seem like staff is really collaborating between the municipalities at CRD. I did see Manager Jackson at the Seaside Center last week, so that was really great. And Planner Humphreys. But a question for us is like, do we also need to have these discussions at a council to board to council, like is there a role for us to play in that too, like something to consider? I will move the recommendations on pages 2 and 3 to get us going. Okay, perfect.
Director Mann, we have the recommendations on the floor, but do you have anything else to add?
Well, just following up on Director Gabius, I think it's really important to show the community how we're bringing all of the myriad regulations that we have control over into alignment along the Sunshine Coast, because we are one community. We're not, a series of little tiny islands battling each other. We need to get this together. And this is actually a pretty amazing opportunity to take a bunch of cobweb-covered OCPs and bring them into the current century, and also align with what our neighbors are doing because we are all neighbors and we need to get our acts together. Thanks.
As he put his hand up. Okay. Director Lee, to the motion, or if you want to make some adjustments, we'll have to amend the motion.
To the motion.
Okay.
On item 3 of the motion, I thought that we should have an addition D that incorporates the community desires into the plan. In other words, in the timeline, we know when the community desires are going to be into the plan. I don't know if that's more detail than we need or not. I'm just wondering what the directors thought.
I'll just quickly put in that would be an amendment to the motion. I certainly take the advice of the other directors, but I was under the impression that's what the OCP was as a whole, was to take the community view into consideration as we move forward with planning. But if people would like to see that specific desire put under D, we can add that in. So would you like to make that motion?
To me, I think that that's an important part of the timeline. And I'd like to see it as a milestone that's reported on. So yeah, I'd like to make that motion.
So we've got an amendment to the
Second it or
motion.
not.
So can you just say it again? So we've got it clear, and we're going to add it under D, 3D.
And that the project timeline be confirmed that item D incorporates community desires into the plan.
Do I have a seconder? Any questions?
Chair,
Claire?
I'd like to ask the staff if they think that that's a clear enough wording or if it should be changed a little. It's hard to do something like this on the fly.
Do you need more clarity in that direction?
I'll say no, Chair. The bylaw that will be adopted will, of course, be the prerogative of the board. Thank you.
Director Gabius, you have some questions of clarity for that particular amendment?
I'm not sure what the purpose is. I'm not sure what it would look like. I don't know what it would add or what it would, or why we need it. I mean, there's going to be an updated engagement and communication strategy with, that will take these changes into consideration. Like, I'm just not sure what, what I'm voting on.
Director Lee, would you like to clarify the intent of the motion?
Yes, I guess what I envisioned was that there would be a specific item in the timeline that says now the community's desires have been integrated. But then listening to GM Hall, he's suggesting that you wouldn't really know that until the bylaws are written. And that makes a lot of sense. So if I may, can I withdraw that motion?
I can't remember the exact detail on this, but how about, I think it'd be cleaner if we voted on it because it has been put on the table and seconded.
Okay, let's vote on it, but you guys make sure you turn it down, huh?
Okay, we have an amendment to the original recommendation. I think we're all clear on what that amendment is, so I'd like to take a vote on it. All those in favor? And we have nobody in favor, so that amendment fails. Thank you. Okay, so all those not in favor of the amendment? That motion fails. Now we're back to the original motion that is on page 2, 2 and 3. We're really rushing through this agenda today. Are we ready? Director Gabius, do you have another comment? Okay. So if we're ready to vote on the recommendations, all those in favor, raise your hands. And that passes unanimously. There's no votes in the negative. Thank you for the discussion. I think, this is a critical part. It's the most important thing we do as well, second most. Well, I think it's important. It is critical. So I'm glad we had this discussion, and we will have many more. So thank you again. It looks like we're taking a 3-minute break. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That was a 10-minute, 3-minute break. Before we move on to 4.2, we do have another motion. Director Lee, would you like to present your motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to add a motion to the earlier ones. I guess it would be number 9. Yeah, oh, it's a separate motion. Okay. And that staff investigate the possibility of an early update to Area A, Bylaw 337, so as to allow ADU and suites as envisioned by Bill 44, and report back to the next EAS committee on the practicality of doing so.
Staff, is the next EAS meeting a realistic timeline? Or could we say EAS meeting?
Thank you. Based on report timelines, Chair, I think April is doable. We can.
So can we-
We're already preparing March reports.
So a friendly, I know we don't do friendly amendments, but can we say an April EAS meeting? Is that okay?
Yes, that would be fine.
And we'll have the seconder again, just pretend. Any questions, Director McMahon?
I just want to say, given the severity of our housing crisis, I think this is an appropriate thing to do if we can.
Seeing no other hands, I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor? And that passes. Anyone against the motion? Not in favor? Not seeing any? That motion passes. Thank you. Now, let's move on to 4.2, Development Approvals Process Review, DAPR Implementation Update. Over to you, staff.
Thank you, Chair. This report provides an update on the implementation of the Development Approvals Process Review final report. It looks at operational impact, progress to date, reflections on progress, and next steps, including 2025 work items. The report highlights 4 actions and related successes flowing from the creation of a development planning and community planning branch system in the Planning and Development Division, the OCP renewal project initiation, addition of incremental resourcing, and the successful grant award from the Local Government Development Approvals Program. Assistant Manager Planning and Development Kevin Jones, who's the head of SCRD's development planning team, will speak to some specifics in the report.
Thank you, Jim Hall. Just to expand a little bit on some of the successes we've seen to date, also some of maybe the challenges we've experienced with implementation, and also then expanding a little bit on the 2025 work plan for DAPR. Some of the improvements we've seen, I think we've made improvements to customer service. We've increased front counter service. We're finding we're responding a lot quicker to kind of emails received, also phone calls, and also improving processing times for some of our more non-complex development applications like development permits. We've also looked at internal operational improvements, ensuring rigor, consistency, and quality in the review of the applications we receive. Adding clarity and readability to our development planning report so they're a little bit more consistent, so easier for the public and the board to understand, hopefully. And also updates to planning fees with a focus on moving more towards a cost recovery model, which was recommended through the DAPR process. There have been a few challenges we've experienced with kind of maybe implementing it as quickly as we'd like. Some of these are around the impact of creating the separate development and community planning branches, which is overall seen as a very positive thing for our department, but it has impacted a little bit staff capacity in terms of the development planning side, managing processing of applications, but also then implementing DAPR at the same time. It's also impacted the ability to have a project champion devoted at the scale that the DAPR report or the final report had recommended. Similarly, has impacted a little bit the ability to have a wider working group, an organization-wide working group, the setting up of that.
to kind of help with the implementation of DAPA. And also, there's probably a need for further consideration potentially around the environmental support piece as well, because a lot of the time we do spend, especially on development permits, they are related to kind of environmental matters. And then finally, just touching on some of the things we're looking at for 2025, as the report states, we're looking at the completion of a new procedures manual, and that's related to the funding we received from UBCM, which would enable more consistent and efficient service in the processing of applications. Related to that, updates to the procedures and fees bylaw, and also planning related aspects of the delegation bylaw will also be a key component of that. We're going to continue working on public-facing information. That could include the development dashboard, which is a public-facing, web-based version of what files we have, what kind of applications we're processing that the public would have access to. Also looking to establish a continuous improvement team, as I mentioned, across all departments to help with the implementation of DAPA across the organization. And finally, looking to advance DAPA through the updates to the OCP and zoning bylaw, which you've obviously already been talking about today. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And so in summary, a year into DAPA implementation, progress has been made in a number of areas, and we're seeing some benefits now or today. For example, those decreased permit processing times and attracting grant resources. And we've also got some things in progress or in process now where we expect that benefits will accrue over time. And in 2025, there's a dual focus on working within approved resources and based on the board's direction flowing from the final report, a dual focus on public-facing information and on continuing to strengthen internal procedures. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Director McMahon.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, but one is, and this stems in part from our correspondence policy that we've been looking at. Do we have customer service objectives in terms of turnaround for response to, say, emails and phone calls? Do we have a policy that says we will respond within 5 business days? Or how do we measure our response times? Thank you.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. We do not. We do not at the corporate level nor at the divisional level. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Cabias.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with a high-level question. I guess a bit in line with what Director McMahon was asking is how do we measure resident satisfaction? I'm happy to see in this report that staff has seen some improvements, and that's really great. DAPA is doing its thing. But how do we, on the other end, like how do we measure resident satisfaction? This, we might not be able to answer this today, but and how do we set the expectations? So kind of a higher level that we might want to talk about. But I do have a specific question. I'm looking at page 21 at the bottom. Dependent on staff, the very bottom corner on the right, dependent on staff resources. So the DAPA report recommended a full-time environmental planner to be budgeted. And a little later on is like a review this need further. Anyway, I think a review is needed or something. So is this something that we can, like, what does that look like? What does review look like? Is this going to come to us, or is this going to be a budget proposal perhaps in the future? Like, what does this mean?
GM Hall, yeah, I had the same question as to whether or not we have a biologist on staff and whether that's something we're looking at and what capacity that would be. So.
Thank you for the question. We do not have in-house qualified environmental professional expertise. The board approved resources as part of the 2024 budget to enhance our capacity around environmental policy. Those resources are, they remain in place, and we are prepared to deploy them in support of updates to our policy framework, which was it is a foundational piece of DAPR identified in the recommendations. And staff expect that that will make a big difference going forward. What's unknown for us is the future need for potentially in-house resources or another form of resources. We're looking forward to making policy improvements with you that will change the profile of the need dramatically, we expect. Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I guess if I understand correctly, is that we're going to see through the policy work what kind of, like, do we need an environmental professional? What would their role be? Or what would they, like, is this, am I understanding this correctly, Chair?
That was my understanding, but Jam Hall, if you just confirm that.
Yes, Chair.
I was right. Director McMahon.
I remember in some workshop or the other, maybe several of them, being told that the planning department is something like 80 to 90% day-to-day, managing day-to-day things, and more like 10 to 20% focused on future planning, long-term planning. Where are we at right now? Because I remember that we were struggling with the long-term because we were so overwhelmed with just getting the work done.
Staff.
So currently the assignment of resources is about 66%. It's about 2/3 to development planning and about 1/3 to community or long-range planning. But that does not, that's sort of based on FTEs. And then within each of those units, there are day-to-day operations and there's extraordinary projects as well. And so the approach that we've set up as a leadership team in planning and development is to attempt to insulate a portion of staff time in each of those branches to work on DAPR, so that we're sharpening the saw while meeting demands for service. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So is the 66% sort of where we want to be, or is that reflective of the fact that we have a major OCP process going on right now? And I assume that's taking up, a lot of bandwidth for staff.
Staff.
Thank you. As we dig into the numbers a little bit, so the 33% also includes project-specific resources that have been approved for the OCP and zoning bylaw project. Taking those out of the equation, it becomes more like an 80-20 ratio. And whether that's where we want to be, there's a service level piece to that where we are maintaining competitive processing times for applications. There are backlogs in a number of permit and other application types as well. So we're doing our best to simultaneously sharpen the saw, plan for the future, and meet community expectations for service while working with what the board expects. Thank you.
So it's not that clear cut, but I think we're getting a better sense of how that is divided up. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I actually kept a summary of the July 4th, 2023 final report from KMG. And I was trying to correlate their suggestions to what we're actually doing. And it's, they suggested we should have had some steps already done. They had timelines that didn't show us going past Q2 2025. Oh no, there's a Q3. But it would appear we're not going to meet all those DAPR recommendations. Well, mostly because we're well behind them already. I wonder if I wonder in my mind if we should have KMG update this timeline, or get their input into how successful we are in implementing the plan, or what do we do about, how do we reconcile the two differences?
I'll just briefly state that the report itself does go into where those deficiencies are and moving forward. Certainly staff can speak more to it and whether or not KPMG is part of, like, they're still on for this particular project. But do you have an additional question to add?
Yeah, that was part of my question, but also we need a timeline for the other items that aren't being worked on as well, I think. Or do we? That's actually what's bothering me about this. This was intended to get us a package of benefits early, and we're seeing some of them, but not all of them. I was hoping that we actually would be seeing way more of them by now. So,
GM Hall, what's the plan?
Thank you, Chair.
Maybe we can go to CAO Pro.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So essentially, whenever we undertake a review such as this, there is always an implementation plan. It is up to the organization to take those suggested recommendations from a consultant and see how it fits within and operationalize them. Oftentimes, there will be dozens of recommendations. We don't always follow them, and changing circumstances can also impact. So one of the key recommendations was updating our OCPs, which is a significant undertaking, as well as our zoning bylaws, which again are already significant undertakings underway. We don't typically have sustaining contracts to always check in. It is up to essentially our organization, along with our decision makers, to commit time, resources on the implementation plan and provide some guidance. Sometimes there might be some recommendations that staff might make back to the elected officials, and some of these are supported through resources. So there was some budget dollars supported for this. So as part of that process, if there's a review and wanting to revisit what some of those priorities are to shift when we're doing things, how we're doing things, then the board absolutely can send that back to staff to bring for reconsideration.
Director Lee, does that answer your question enough?
Kind of, but I was given an expectation that this would happen and these things would happen in that time. And I've never been told they weren't going to happen as related to the original plan. So we must have a new plan, but I don't know. I know what parts of the new plan are here, but not all of them. I can't relate it back to the original plan to see what's happening with all the steps that were recommended and when they might actually happen, or if they're going to happen. So it's quite confusing to me. I don't know. I make statements to my constituents, and then something changes that they're no longer valid. But how do I communicate that the plan has changed and what the new plan is? That's a real problem for me.
So if I am understanding that there's a series of recommendations, not all of them have been implemented, and what is the process for whether or not that was implemented and whether or not they are going to be implemented and what the timeline is that?
I wish I'd said that. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to move forward on this because this is an updated report. We could come back to a later meeting with recommendations. That's my initial suggestion rather than coming up with a blanket motion. But any advice, staff?
Thank you, Chair. As information to offer to the dialogue occurring at the table, staff have provided a bulletin, attachment B, that's intended to be published following your consideration of this report, that provides some messages about upcoming work and may be helpful to directors. And the other thing to say is we do intend to offer regular reports on DAPR progress. And if we're happy to adapt the format to meet your needs. And so if there's feedback offered now or beyond this conversation on the format that would be most helpful, staff are happy to integrate that into future reporting. Thank you.
Is that helpful, Director Lee? Can we maybe work between meetings and come up with something a little
Yes.
more clear as to
Yes.
what you're needing? Okay?
I think I clearly see my task now. So yes, I will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do want to get on with the meeting. So quick questions, Director McMahon and Director Gabius, and then we'll move on.
I want to go back to, and just to warn you, I'm going to throw this one at the CAO. I want to go back to the topic of customer service because picking on one department is not particularly fair. We should probably have a corporate standard for customer service, especially response to public inquiries. And, I have to say, from the outset, I am much less likely to hear from constituents who are happy with the service they receive from the SCRD. Like what I get primarily, not always, but primarily is complaints when people are unhappy. And the thing that annoys people the most is not hearing a response, making a phone call, sending an email, and not hearing back for weeks and weeks. And I think that we need to do that better as an organization. Even if the response is, I'm sorry, we're busy and we can't get to your file right now, it's an answer and it's polite. So I'm just wondering, CAO, what would be the appropriate way for us to address this?
There are many options. And I think one of the considerations would be in the aspect of service level decisions, which we don't have consistent around the organization. And so we also, even within a service, we have very diverse service standards. So whether it's transit, I'm going to give that an example. You've got custom and then you have conventional, and you would have different service standards related to that. So if it's front-facing customer service that you're talking about, or service levels, which is administration in nature, meaning customer service focused, then we could attempt to bring something forward to the policy committee for consideration, which I think convenes in the summertime or spring, so June. And so we could always bring something forward to that for consideration and bring, obviously, it may not be perfect. It would be a first standard, but it would definitely signal both to staff and to the public that we're hearing them. And I know that the communications team has signaled on doing a citizen satisfaction survey in the near future. Just constraints due to capacity and whatnot have gotten in the way of that. So that would be the suggestion for a first try.
quick follow-up question.
Our communications policy, what's the scope? Does it apply only to, I don't know, corporate services, or does it apply across the organization?
It's corporate wide, but it doesn't, I think, delve into the granularity of how people are going to operate from a customer service perspective. That would be more divisional, but we'll consider and take that back for consideration on how we do it.
Thank you. I'm seeing no other hands up, and this was a report for information. Thank you, staff. This really gives us light behind the curtain as to how we're moving ahead with this process. So thank you again for the work. So moving on to 4.3, Official Community Plan Amendment number 640.6 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment number 722.10, consideration of adoption. Manager Jackson, would you like to introduce this?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to inform the committee that the Ministry of Transportation and Transit have approved zoning bylaw amendment 722.10 pursuant to section 52(3)(a) of the Transportation Act and provided a letter stating they have no objections to the OCP amendment 640.6. Approval from the ministry was the final condition set by the SCRD board for consideration of adoption of the proposed amendments. For the 0.3 hectare portion of non-agricultural land reserve land at 1691 Jensen Road in Area F, West Howe Sound. The board approves the amendments. The applicant is permitted to submit subdivision and development permit applications to the SCRD to pursue subdivision that they propose through this application. Staff recommend the Official Community Plan Amendment 640.6 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment 722.10 be presented to the board for adoption. Staff are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Manager Jackson. We've seen this file come up several times. It's going through its process. It's how the public process works on these kind of files. So there's no, Director McMahon.
Yeah, I feel like we've seen it 15 times. That map is getting really familiar. But I'm happy to move the recommendations on page 27.
And I have a seconder. I see no further hands. I'd like to call the vote. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. That's a board. Okay, next is 4.4, and that's also my area, always happening in my area. So that's on page 42, and that's the Development Variance Permit DVP 00090, and that's on Tideview Road. We have seen this about a year ago. So thank you, Planner Rajla.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this development variance permit application is to reduce the setback for a structure adjacent to a highway or internal private road from 5 meters to 0 meters for the construction of a single-unit dwelling. The SCRD board considered the variance application at the January 25th, 2024 board meeting and adopted a resolution that consideration of the development variance permit be deferred to a future EAS committee meeting once more information is received from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure regarding the setback permit. Since the variance was originally considered by the board, MOTI, now MOTT, has indicated that they are supportive of this setback variance and will be issuing a permit to the applicant. Staff recommend issuing the development variance permit and are available to answer any questions or concerns.
As this is my area, I have a couple of questions before I move the recommendation. I know there were some concerns about this one. I have to say I still really appreciate that this is back up off the water and that they did have extra constraints given the new 50-meter setback from the ocean. But I think in this case it really benefits from that. The question I had is there's a note saying they're within 100 meters of an archaeological site of some kind. Will they be able to start building right away, or do they have other permits that they have to get before they can start building?
I'd have to check the original report, but I believe that there was a strong recommendation to get a PFR done from the nation. Not sure
So
if that's
strong recommendation means, GM Hall. I can't see them.
Thank you. It's an owner's responsibility to, well, and anybody altering land, it's their responsibility to ensure that they adhere to the Heritage Conservation Act. And without knowing whether a PFR was conducted, whether monitoring is required as a associated with a heritage permit, staff can't speak to the specifics of requirements that might extend beyond that general blanket requirement that provincial legislation must be followed. Thank you.
Thank you. And another comment is the applicants, if they can just be, again, strongly encouraged to connect with their neighbors. I know this has been part of the issue with that neighborhood. I did walk along Tide View. It's not a real road. It's like an island road. It's not much there. So yes, if they could really connect, it would help on the long term, I think. So given that, I would just like to make the recommendations on page 42 as presented. And we have seconders. I have no further comments or questions. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff, for that. Next in our reports is 4.5 frontage waiver, FRW 00024 Wood Bay Ridge Road, Electoral Area B. And Planner Jones, you're going to speak to this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The purpose of this frontage waiver is to facilitate a 6-lot subdivision located on Wood Bay Ridge Road in Half Moon Bay electoral area. The frontage of 3 of the proposed lots comprise between 6 and 7% of the perimeter of the parcel due to the limitations associated with the road location and the steep topography affecting the lot layout. As the frontage waiver for proposed lots 43, 44 and 45 falls under the required 100% minimum, per section 512 of the Local Government Act, a frontage waiver application is required. Staff consider the frontage waiver reasonable and are recommending its approval, and we're available for questions. Thank you.
Director Gabius.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the report. I don't see any red flags here, so I will move the recommendations on page 60.
Do I have a seconder? We have seconders. And I have another question. So Director McMahon.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm looking at the map on the last page there. This is only considering the properties within the heavy border and not the ones with the funky easements. 25 and 26, they're not being considered as part of this, it's only the other one. I just ask because that easement situation there is eccentric, to say the least.
Yeah, through the chair. So yeah, it's just the lots within the heavy border. So it would be lots 27, 42, 43, 44, 45 and 46, the subject to this frontage waiver.
So this is just a general question. I have some properties in my area that are at war because an easement like this was set up and the neighbors don't get along. And I was told by then Moti that they no longer make arrangements like this. So I was just wondering, is this historical, or are they still allowing these very imaginative lot layouts?
That's correct in the case of the one on the property. That's a historical one. Like, we would look at each application on its merits these days. But yeah, I appreciate there can be issues with like historical easements on property granting access to a future lot to be developed. So we would, if possible, try and avoid those. But, sometimes they may be the only option.
Thank you. Any other questions about this? We have a motion on the floor. We have a seconder. If we're ready to vote, all those in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So moving on to communications, we have nothing new for communications. We have no new business. We don't have an in-camera report. So I'd like to move that we adjourn this meeting, and then I'll take any comments after, questions from the afterwards. So I have a mover and seconder on adjournment. All those in favor? And that passes. Thank you very much, directors. And then I just call. So there's nobody in the in-person gallery. Is there anybody that'd like to speak from the Zoom gallery? No, seeing no hands, I'd like to end the meeting. So thank you very much.